The incomparable Malcolm McDowell, fabulous actor, Teresa Ann Savoy, Helen Mirren, Peter O'Toole, Sir John Gielgud, the sets, the costumes, the outfits, the people, the actors, the incredible spectacle, a Penthouse production. 1979, Caligula. So yeah, Caligula is the only X-rated movie you'll probably ever hear me review. I actually saw it when I was a student at college at Blockbuster Video. There was a foreign film section, and they had the rated R version of Caligula. And I thought, well, it looks interesting. Amazing stuff. So I am a former history major. I was studying history at the time. I had Latin. I love Roman history. I used to have a chart of all the Roman emperors of the East and West on my dorm room wall and memorize them. I don't know if I could get through, probably through the fall of the Western Empire now if I really worked at it. Caligula is a fascinating guy. In fact, I was working on a thesis, undergrad thesis on Caligula at the time. I ended up going a different direction because we had to do a thesis for history of political science to finish even at the bachelor level. And I still did something Roman, but I didn't do the focus on Caligula. So this movie was something else. I picked it up. I had never heard of it, obviously because, and being made, you know, in Italy, having the Italian director, I'm blanking on his name, famous guy. Of course, it was in the foreign film section, but really, I didn't find out till later that there was an unedited version that is a dirty movie. I mean, it's an X-rated film. So I did eventually get a hold of, on one of its anniversaries, they released Caligula on DVD, and I owned it for a while, not anymore. Now that we've gone to streaming, I kind of got rid of all that. So I did see the full X-rated version later. Caligula is historically accurate, disturbingly historically accurate. This is pagan Rome. One of my pet peeves with movies about Rome is they always want to focus on the sexual depravity and all the things going on. It's almost fetishized. Whereas they'll do this in movies that are set later even. If you see something like Attila the Hun with Powers Booth, great miniseries. But that was well into the Christian era, and they note that in the story, and yet they want to show public orgies because, darn it, it's Rome. But for the last few hundred years of its reign in the West, the Roman Empire was Christian, and for 1,000 years in the East. But Caligula, this is pagan Rome, and it's pagan Rome at its most debauched, where they themselves had been bemoaning, some of their politicians, their loss of family values. Even from a pagan perspective, they were not going by the principles of their ancestors. And so all sorts of things are happening that aren't even considered moral by an old Roman standard, but as part of the decadence and decline of a society that's sliding downhill. That decades of empire, of corrupt politics have just fostered an immoral, antinomian, it's a really sick and twisted culture. And of course, because of the decadence of the era, this was the perfect thing for Penthouse Video. And there's a whole story you can look up. They were unhappy with what was supposed to be the finished product. They tacked in all sorts of the nice, dirty. When it suddenly switches and it seems like, well, this is a porn movie, it's because they had to make sure they got that in there, got their X rating. And it is not historically inaccurate. It was just more than what you really needed to see. Sadly, there's some good parts of the movie that were cut out for the rated R version because sometimes important things are being discussed while people are naked or touching themselves. And so the rated R version that I watched first and loved and watched many times before I ever got to the full X-rated, that is a good version of the movie, but there are some little historical tidbits missing where it doesn't flow quite as well. But accurately depicts the prevailing theories about Tiberius's death. Tiberius would play this game where he'd pretend to be dead in the morning, like he didn't wake up, and everybody would celebrate, and then he'd wake up and be like, ha ha ha, and then punish the people that celebrated. He went to the well once too often is the story, and they finally just strangled him to death. In the movie version, they show where young Caligula has his mirror and he wants to smash him, and he can't bring himself to do it, but Macro, the commander of the guard, grabs the curtains and strangles the aged and sick Tiberius to death. Again, historically accurate, well captured, from the death of Tiberius all the way through to the death of Caligula. There's some major events that are left out for the sake of time. Even with a reign of only 4 years as emperor, roughly, you can't get everything that Caligula did or get into all of the details. But Malcolm McDowell is just an incomparable actor, and he really is outstanding when playing these deviant roles like he did in A Clockwork Orange, when he's playing somebody villainous, when he's got that capacity to be absolutely believable as both a gentleman or a sociopath, but his ability to be a sociopath is so uniquely good, he ends up really being outstanding in those roles. The only downside for me is they don't really touch on some of the things that I was working on with my thesis. My thesis was the notion that Caligula was insane, and that drove what he did. My thesis was that he was not insane at all. That when people who were part of the plot to assassinate you write the history of your reign, it's going to be colored by their propaganda. On the other hand, Caligula is not really a good guy. He's a guy who was determined to create an autocratic state after an Egyptian model. All of these things sort of mirrored from he had spent time in Egypt as a child and as part of his education, loved all things Egyptian, worshipped the goddess Isis from Egypt, and it kind of explains some of the things that he does that are excessive. Having a relationship with his own sister, which is markedly by the Romans, this is not cool, but it is an old Egyptian custom, and somebody's convinced of his own deification or his inevitable deity and loves that Egyptian way of looking at deity, it makes sense that he would be looking for one of his sisters to potentially be his wife. It makes sense that he would be trying to humiliate the Senate, forcing senators' wives to work in a brothel to fix the deficit he had created is just part of the tip of the iceberg. Not only does this demonstrate the impotence of the Senate under this tyranny, that they let this go on so long before they assassinated him, but the longer that it went on, the more it brought into question all of their pedigrees of their descendants. To break the power of the Senate aristocracy permanently seems to have been the goal. But my whole thesis notwithstanding, the movie is absolutely brilliantly presented. He definitely does play it as he's not being clever, but he is a psychopath. He's deeply troubled. But it's a fabulous movie. It's a wonderful production. All of the dirtiness aside. It's not streaming anywhere. I think it's a Penthouse thing. So I don't know. I mean, would you look at a porn? So I don't know who would be carrying it. No one's streaming it right now that I could find. But if you find the rated R version, that's definitely more acceptable. The X-rated version, you're going to actually see stuff you didn't need to see. But that doesn't detract from the brilliant performances, the good, solid history, and the way that the story comes together. It's just some brilliant work. So if you've seen it, let me know what you think. If you can find it, let me know what you think. Caligula.